Hi, welcome to Toys and Hood. Today I'm taking a look at an old White Dwarf. This is White Dwarf number 75. It came out 40 years ago nearly, in March 1986. It's so old that it's before Warhammer 40,000 was released by a year and a half. So 40K came out in September 1987. Warhammer was around at the time. Warhammer had come out in 1983. But still, this is... well, it's not really a miniatures game magazine, it's a role-playing game and a board game magazine at this time. There aren't many miniatures in it. So please join me as we take a look at it and we get this real kind of deep dive into the past of Games Workshop. Here's the front cover. As you can see, this is the role-playing games monthly White Dwarf. It's not yet Games Workshop's monthly catalogue, monthly miniatures catalogue, which is what it becomes. It's number 75, got a silhouette of Gobildigook there, the White Dwarf. The price, 95 pence. It's a Virgin price label there, so that means it's from a Virgin Megastore. Virgin Megastores are basically like HMV, a UK store that sells videos, music, and Virgin Megastores were essentially like that, but they also had a gaming section, so you'd be able to pick up White Dwarf from there. Looking at the front cover, we have, well, this isn't Warhammer or anything kind of related here, this kind of aberration here looks like, this is probably a Call of Cthulhu one. In fact, there is an adventure, Call of Cthulhu adventure in here, so maybe that artwork's from that. It's also reminiscent of the film Society, which has a lot of shape changing, kind of body warping going on in that. That would have been out in the mid-80s at some point as well, so I wonder if that had an influence. Well, let's dive in and see what's inside. So first off, we have an advert for Cosmic Encounter. Cosmic Encounter is, well, it's a board game that's been around for ages. I think it was around in 1977 in the first place. It's still in print now. It's actually now in print by Fantasy Flight Games, and it's on the 5th edition. So it's still going there, but nice full-page colour advert there, available from Games Workshop. Okay, your contents and things. This look actually is very familiar in White Dwarf for years afterwards. I think it wasn't until the late 90s that it changed in look. The kind of key thing I think that's interest here is the editor-in-chief is Ian Livingstone. So Ian Livingstone is one of the founders of Games Workshop. Along with Steve Jackson, they wrote the fighting fantasy novels, you know, like Warlock, Firetop Mountain, Sorcerer, things like that. They founded Games Workshop. Ian Livingstone seems to be a bit more hands-on than Steve Jackson in all of this, and he's involved in the White Dwarf magazine. Doesn't seem to do much in this apart from get credited. None of the other names I've really heard of. Although Joe Dever, I think, did the Lone Wolf novels, again, which was like a kind of fantasy, like a fighting fantasy series. And then Graham Davies we see in certain things as well. This page, you've got Open Box, which is a series of independent reviews for games that Games Workshop produce, or at least they'd stock. So they had a lot of roleplay games in their stores. Golden Heroes Supervisor Kit by Games Workshop. This is quite cool in the review. They actually turn around and they're like, look, Games Workshop, can you please sort this bit out with the game, which is quite neat. There's Terror of the Lichmaster, which is an expansion for Warhammer. That had a series of buildings with it, as well as some scenarios that you play out. Fragments of Fear, so this is a supplement for Call of Cthulhu. Judgment Day, the first scenario for Judge Dredd, only £4 when it came out, £3.95. Then they actually review Cosmic Encounter for £10.95. Publisher's Law, this is a review of fantasy and science fiction books, basically. Just very quick reviews. There's an awful lot of text in old White Dwarf, so now we're so used to just colour, and White Dwarf is an impressive magazine to read. This is just, like, yeah, blocks and blocks of text. But, of course, this is before the internet. This is where you're getting your information from. So, actually, more information can only be a good thing. And they get a lot of information out there. Here, you've got a section which is all about science fiction and horror movies. Well, fantasy and science fiction movies, they describe. So you've got Return of the Living Dead reviewed there. You've got Fright Nights reviewed, which amazingly at the time it was a PG, which is ridiculous because Fright Night is terrifying. It's so terrifying that although I'm going to cut in to show you the front cover now, what I'm not going to do is show you the main, like, female vampire, because back in the late 80s, that scared the shit out of me as a kid. I really just couldn't look at it again. And in fact, the Company of Wolves they review here as well. The Company of Wolves, there's a scene where a werewolf just appears out of somebody's throat, basically. It rips its way out. They're horrible. But then they also have Teen Wolf, again a PG, so it's quite a mix here. They don't seem to like Fright Night, which is a shame because it's a wonderful, wonderful film. And while I would not suggest you watch it with children, as a grown-up, it is brilliant. So you've got some independent adverts here. There's some adverts for RuneQuest. So we've got games by mail from Games Workshop, so it's sort of the original Games Workshop mail order here. You've got Judgment Day for Judge Dredd, if you want to be able to order that. Then you've got a game of Superpowers, which is a World Affairs board game from Games Workshop as well. Games Workshop are doing lots and lots of different things here. They've got role-play games, they've got board games, they've obviously started Warhammer, and it's really kind of interesting to see these early days and how they do just kind of, well, it's essentially thrown up shit that something sticks, you know, and that something would be Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000, and it went really big, which is brilliant. There's a comic here. This is Thrud the Barbarian. Thrud the Barbarian is really legendary amongst gamers from back in the 80s. This particular comic strip, it's Thrud complaining about, well, Thrud is worried about being perceived as sexist by a bikini-clad, kind of the traditional fantasy woman there, and then it's pointed out that Thrud is himself only really wearing a loincloth. They kind of get to the bottom of that. And then he says, oh, all right, love, well, I'm glad we've sorted this out. We're not sexist. Do you fancy coming out for a drink? At which point, he is sexist, and she hits him. It's kind of quaint fantasy humour, I guess I'll say. So let's say it's of its time and move on. RuneQuest, ruminations here. So thoughts on RuneQuest 3 and the kind of the ruling behind it. Again, it's a lot of text going through, and it's a lot of ramblings. Really weird when you buy a magazine and you think, well, to understand this, you have to have played that game. Rollmaster advert there, and then How to Save a Universe, the delights of superhero gaming. This is a nice little article that basically talks about how playing superheroes can be fun, how it's like D&D is sort of a superhero game, a few aspects of that. It's another article that's basically musing over roleplay games and where we are. Talks about lots of different variety, how you can introduce humour into your games, basically how superhero games are just so versatile, which it's hard to disagree with. More adverts. We've got a new magazine, Adventurer, coming out, 90p, available from all good game shops and bookstores. Doesn't actually go as far as to say what it actually is. Is it a comic? Is it a magazine of games? Who knows? I guess you have to just kind of buy it and find out. Play-by-mail games here, 2 world-beating play-by-mail games. So play-by-mail games, basically, I remember we were talking about computers, well, we were talking about a time before computers as we know them today, where you might have an Atari 2600, possibly a Nintendo Entertainment System at home, but you don't really have the big fantasy games that we're used to. These, you basically write in with your turn, you post them out every, let's say every month, you get a reply back in the post with how your turns are active, and that's how you play. You play a couple of quid, you know, say 3 turns a time, and that's it. It's a really nice idea in kind of the world before computer games. Gamesmanship. I did find this a really interesting article. Again, lots and lots of text, tiny little illustration. It's really about metagaming in these games. You know, if you just say, oh, you've run into a ghost and everyone knows the rules for ghosts, it's not very scary. Whereas if you can keep that mystery about it, it keeps your players scared. And this is basically an article all about that, kind of thought-provoking stuff about running roleplay games. An advert here for Citadel Miniatures Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champions range. Now, I'm also been preparing a kind of the origins of chaos, where I look at, you know, where the symbols came from, where the names come from as a video. And while I've been writing that, one of the things that's come up is Elric, the Eternal Champion, and his sword Stormbringer. This is where the kind of idea of chaos is very much brought into it, and also the 8-pointed star that Chaos used in Warhammer and 40K. That is a symbol from this series of magazines. So it's interesting to see that Citadel Miniatures have the license for this at the time. It's also, and this is kind of one of the nice things about these adverts, you can see the miniatures there. You can see pictures of the miniatures. In other adverts that you'll see later on, you don't. You just get a name. Another comic strip here. Once again, another arguably sexist comic strip. I'm hoping this is just a bad run for this issue. It's just bad luck. But we do indeed have a naked lady found in a spaceship. I can't even follow this this comic strip. I've tried reading it several times. I don't really get it. I do understand that it's a tribute to the film Life Force. Life Force is a wonderful, wonderful science fiction movie which features space vampires basically taking over the world. So it is a tribute to that. As for the plot, it's very hard to follow some of these things when they're written down. They're trying to tell complete stories, but they end up being a bit of a mess. Bit here about Traveller. Traveller is a science fiction game. It's been around for years and years and years. I think it's nearly as old as D&D. Talking about different tech levels. Planet, you know, your most basic level is well, like medieval Europe. Then you go all the way up to fax machines and things like that, and then your holographs or whatever. You know, you have the higher tech levels, depending on what kind of science fiction level of planet you're on. Another incredibly niche article, if you're not into these things. Nightmare in Green. This is a full D&D adventure. So as we've just talked about not running into, there's a whole article about trying to make things different and not just telling people goes, we've got what is basically a kind of dungeon crawl here that you can do. And you go forward, you run into lots of different types of fungus, lots of different yellow moulds, brown moulds, shambling mounds, basically all of the kind of plant monsters that you can run into in a game. But it's cool. It's a full-on little adventure for D&D. You know, it's definitely more than a one-shot here. It'll keep you going for a few days' entertainment. That's cool. All the rules for the monsters that you might need. Advert here from TSR. So TSR, the people who originally produced Dungeons & Dragons. I think it's Tactical Simulation Rule Set, TSR stands for. And here they're saying it's a set 4 of the master rules for Dungeons & Dragons. So if you really, really want to get good, you need, well, lots and lots of books. White Dwarf Letters. This is a really interesting kind of set of pages here. The kind of the themes here going on, there's basically somebody's written in like the previous month, the month before, in fact, White Dwarf 73, so what, 2 months earlier. And they basically said, like, adolescents are ruining the hobby. So what you end up with is a load of adolescents now, like 14, 15-year-olds, basically writing in and saying, I'm really sorry, Phil Masters, I will, shame him a little bit here if he's still around 40 years from now. These guys are saying, well, actually, we play these games, and we play these games like grown-ups, and don't judge us as we're kids, which is really cool. And it's really cool that Games Workshop brought these letters together. Again, magazines at the time, letter pages are a big deal because there aren't the forums, there's not the Facebook pages, there's none of this social side that we're used to. There aren't even that many Games Workshop shops at this point, so you can't, you're not going in and talking to people about these. Another thing that's come up in letters is some comments about the portrayal of women in fantasy. There's a lot of people here kind of sticking up for that view, basically, but also saying that, we should welcome women into the hobby and stuff. Interesting that we still have these same kind of problems and discussions 40 years on. There's some interesting comments. There's a review of Twilight 2000. Twilight 2000 it's just been re-released actually by Free League Publishing nowadays, but it's a World War III game. Basically, Cold War goes hot. Europe ends up just devastated with nuclear weapons and whatnot. You are the last survivors of some sort of military outfit trying to work together and basically survive. It's a very gritty game. Here, the author's written in, following on from a review in the previous magazine, and basically complaining about how people aren't reviewing the game, they're reviewing his sort of portrayal of things, and they're saying, well, look, it's an American game, and this is how Americans are. So, but he actually writes in and kind of sticks up about it, which is kind of cool. And then there's a few other articles there supporting it. Lastly, there's a couple of letters just complaining about the amount of comic strips in White Dwarf nowadays. Can we please get more articles? The Heart of the Dark. This is a Call of Cthulhu scenario, a whole Call of Cthulhu series here. So Call of Cthulhu is basically a roleplay game of kind of, like the Cthulhu stuff, H.P. Lovecraft's books. It's this idea of otherworldly kind of monsters and gods that influence our world, but ultimately care very little about humans and are beyond our comprehension. So you sort of get glimpses of it. This is one such adventure where that body has turned up, you're investigating that, there's all sorts of cults involved, and it's up to you really how kind of deep it goes. And the way we portray this adventure is with lots of text. But we do have these silhouettes of spiders, kind of cool. So adverts here, no colour. So we've got a paint advert. You're basically buying the paints from the name there. Ruby, bright red, orange, great. I need an orange paint. Oh, I guess I'll buy an orange paint. The same here, you've got lists, Grenadier models list, 25mm. Do you want a War Mammoth for £9.75? Do you want the Call of Cthulhu Adventurers, £9.75? No idea what actually goes in them. I mean, can you even phone up? I don't think you can on this advert. You're looking at writing to them if you can't get them from your local shops. Quite a few of these. Again, this one doesn't do it. If you write in, send a self-addressed envelope, stamped self-addressed envelope, and they'll send you the catalogue that they have. Drastic plastic adverts. Cool. Now, these are Citadel Miniatures plastics. This is a box set that has, at this point, it's plastic orcs. Later on, it will become the Warhammer Fantasy Regiment set, which has orcs, Skaven, elves, dwarves in, a real mix in there. These are awesome. As we just saw, the Cthulhu Adventure is £9.75. The plastic models are so cheaper. It's 75p for a pack of 3 orcs. So 25p a figure, whereas normally you're looking at £1. So they're a quarter of the price. And there you go. Send a stamped address envelope for full mail order details. More store adverts. an article on character background in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Basically, how you could make a character a bit more interesting by rolling a few dice, having a sibling, kind of thinking about how your character fits in with society. You know, just it's not just an orphan who's going off adventuring, which is kind of a traditional fantasy gaming thing. So this is talking about using oil paints to paint your miniatures. Talking about buying oil paints, using mediums to thin them, using accessories. So again, as I've said, there aren't many resources available at the time. So if you can get stuff from a local art shop, well, that's brilliant, because you might have a local art shop. You won't necessarily have a local game shop. I mean, all of this really makes me think we really need to be grateful for Games Workshop and the other stores that are out there, plus the internet that can just get us these things. Got a selection of painted models. These Earth Elemental and Fire Elemental from Citadel Miniatures, I just think are so cool. Obviously, they also did a water and an air one. Really, really nice looking models. More adverts, including Dragon Meet 86, which is a conference at the University of Manchester, all about gaming. Just Dread advert there for the roleplay game. Stevium Games. Stevium Games are really important for the success of the gaming industry in the UK, I think. Stevium Games are now known as Modi UK. So they're kind of the Fantasy Flight Games and all of those games distributors. But they used to be distributors for all the role-play games. They were really organised. They're basically the big distributors in the UK. If you wanted any of this stuff, they'd be importing it from the US and things. But also supplying other stores with it. When I used to work in a independent game shop in the late 90s, well, in fact the mid-90s to the late 90s, Stevium Games was where we got all of our products from. And they have a massive, massive range. Lots of D&D stuff. DC Heroes game springs out. There's Call of Cthulhu, I've mentioned a few times, a Middle-earth role-playing game. Rollmaster, Traveller, we had that at the beginning. A Star Trek role-playing game at the time. And again, no pictures of this, just massive, massive lists of names and text. Gobildigook, another kind of famous strip. This went for years. This is just about some goblins. In this case, some goblins defending their lair. Some dwarves come in and are attacking it. They manage to get through most of the stuff, and then boom, at the end, they get, well, blown up. A bit of gossip about Grenadier Miniatures and Realpatha, some licensing. Those are two other miniatures companies. I've no idea if they're even still going. Again, in the 80s and 90s, they did a lot of D&D models. They really felt quite exciting with what they were doing. I think they never made the link. One of the big things Games Workshop did, and I think why Warhammer came out, was give you a reason to use lots of miniatures. If you were buying miniatures for just Dungeons and Dragons, what you find happens is, yes, you've got the one adventure, then the models go back on the shelf and you don't look at them again. Whereas with Warhammer, you actually build an army and you use that army again and again and again, which is kind of what makes it exciting and interesting. I've had a lot more conversations about the miniatures I've collected for armies than I ever have for the miniatures that I've made for Dungeons and Dragons. And I do have quite a few miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons. So this is just a fair bit of rambling on the other side. A couple of other adverts. A computer moderated play-by-mail game. And classified, so lots of these. I love these. So as I said, you know, this is the social side. You get wanted adverts, people looking for books, people looking for players is quite cool. You know, people looking for a local gaming club. Some people are looking for pen pals and things, which again is really, really interesting. You know, I had a pen pal back in the late 90s, not for gaming, that was just arranged through the school. But that was quite interesting, kind of writing to Poland and learning about stuff, you know, and the same idea here of going and learning about games from other people, talking about fans. I think that'd be pretty awesome, really. And there's quite a few just jokey adverts here where people have written in just to use big words and get their value for money when you're paying 15p a word or something, I think it is. There's people, yeah, looking for players everywhere. I mean, a lot of people are kind of like 13 to 16. I don't think we'd want to be advertising this in a magazine nowadays. Pen pals wanted. Most of which are really kind of harmless kind of pen pal requests. I think there's only one in here, and I can't find it now, that's just a tiny bit creepy, which is where an attractive female pen pal is wanted. But on the whole, these seem to be quite sensitive, kind of, you know, people just trying to find local gamers. And there's a list of gaming clubs there. More adverts for stores. More adverts for stores and models here. Again, you know, your miniatures are just lists of them. There's your Virgin Game Centre adverts. So you have your Virgin Mega Centres, which were like the HMV I was saying at the beginning, and then the Virgin Game Centres are more about science fiction games, fantasy, fighting fantasy books, things like that. Alchemy Metalware. I don't know if this became Bulldog Buckles later on, because there is some licensed products that they did years and years later. But here's a whole range of kind of skulls, and generally kind of, you know, your gothic clothing that you might want to wear. Lots and lots of skulls and dragons and roses. If we don't have it, you don't need it. Games Workshop, the specialist game store. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stores at this point. I mean, what are they now? 500 stores? More adverts. More adverts. More adverts. Ride of the Storm. Nazgul models from Citadel Miniatures. Here we have artwork. We don't actually have any pictures of the models. There's a lot of trust involved in the gaming industry at this point. And now we're on the final page here. We've got the zombie dragon described for Warhammer. It feels like we finally got to the end of the book. 66 pages into White Dwarf, so White Dwarf is quite short. You probably find, actually, like, value for money, you probably are paying the same per page nowadays. But here you've got a nice big colour advert for it, and then you've got the rules for being able to fight with a zombie dragon in Warhammer. This is the first mention of kind of Warhammer actual rules that we've got in this magazine that would later become the Warhammer magazine, Games Workshop's magazine. It's crazy. And then just lastly, we have an advert at the back for the Oriental Adventures from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This, I mean, the type is amazing here. The Oriental Adventures is a complete subsystem for AD&D adventures set in the Far East. It's fully compatible with the Western Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules, but it's good enough to stand alone as a separate version of the game. I just love the idea of anything being described as good enough. But Oriental Adventures was a real kind of classic expansion for Dungeons and Dragons as well. Well, that's typical, isn't it? I ran out of battery just as I got to the end of the the end of the video there. So I'm just quickly finishing off on my phone here. Just ignore the cardboard boxes in the corner. I would try to keep that a shot normally. I'm basically having a bit of a clear out for the year, trying to get myself a bit more focused. I mean, my gaming room. In fact, I'll show you my gaming room. Let's have a look at this. I don't think I've done this before. So there you go. There's the other side. There's the green screen where I record stuff. Just lots of IKEA stuff. I've got a couple of 3D printers. There's one you've just seen there. There's one in the corner there. So yeah, this is basically where all my stuff is. But thank you very much. As I say, so this is White Dwarf 75 that we've just taken a look at. Thank you very much for my friend Paul, who bought me it for my birthday because he knew how much I enjoyed making videos about the old White Dwarfs. This has been a weird one because, of course, there's not much Warhammer in there, and it is before my time. It either became a very quick, I'm going to run through this like I have, or it was going to have to be a kind of, oh, I'm going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, or I'm going to talk about Traveller, or I'm going to do this. And we would just be spending hours and hours and hours looking at that, which I don't think anyone wants. So hopefully this has given you a kind of broad overview of what a White Dwarf used to be. Kind of, you can see how things have changed over the years. Where we are now, it is so different. It's such a glimpse into the past. I mean, gaming itself nowadays is just so much more inviting. It's more open. It's easier to find players. It's just easier to get involved. It's easier just to find out how to paint models or what the models you're going to buy are going to look like. So yeah, White Dwarf, massive improvement. The gaming, just the world is better. I'm sure of it. I don't know what people would say back then, but yes. So I'm Steve. This has been Toys in the Hood. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. You know, please like, subscribe. If you've got ideas for other videos that you'd like to see, give me a shout and I will try to include them. Yeah, thank you very much for your time and see you soon. Cheers.